The head of the International Chemical Weapons Watchdog, shortly known as the OPCW, has praised Syria for cooperating with the mission of his team to dismantle the country's chemical arsenal.
The cooperation has been quite constructive, and I would say that the Syrian authorities have been cooperative. The Syrian government has already appointed a focal point also for interaction with our organization. They have at the moment one ambassador from Damascus, from Syrian side in town, and they have also sent two experts who are in fact consulting with our experts during this week, and it may continue during next week also, to put together the initial declaration as well as, in fact, preparing the destruction plan.
Are the timelines unrealistic?
Ahmed Uzuncu says his team of inspectors has so far visited one chemical site in Syria. He says there are still over 20 sites which will need to be visited in the coming weeks. Uzuncu has further described the mission of his team to eliminate Syria's chemical weapons by mid-2014 as realistic. He's also called for temporary ceasefires in Syria's raging conflict in order to meet the UN's disarmament deadlines. A group of OPCW arms experts has been sent to Syria to destroy its weapons production facilities. A second team is expected to be sent there in the near future. Let's talk with William Springs. He's a human rights activist, and he joins us from London about this. William Spring, if we want to look at the bigger picture here, you have a government of Bashar al-Assad who has been cooperating quite actively with the OPCW and the UN inspectors. The big question is why, on this very sensitive issue, does the West, including the US, for example, and France, continue not only with calls for regime change, but also with arming and funding the insurgents there? Shouldn't there be less of rhetoric in that regards and just praise from the Syrian government so as to not push or put that off the route that it's on in terms of eliminating these chemical arsenal of the government?
There was a win-win situation, in my opinion, over this Kerry-Putin agreement. Because if you recall, the basis, the context in which it was arrived at was that the United States was threatening unilateral military action against Syria. Now, whenever this has happened before in conflicts, the balance has been tipped. If you get air power involved, the balance is then always tipped against the legitimate government. This happened in Libya. It happened in Yugoslavia. When the insurgents were losing, at that point, the NATO comes in with its air power to squash the government. Now, the important thing from Putin's angle and from the point of view of the Syrian national interest was to head off that type of scenario. And that was done by this agreement, which meant everybody, or at least Kerry, saved face. He's able to go back to his Republicans in Congress and say, oh, well, you know, we've now disarmed the Syrians of their chemical weapons. No matter that they were not in use, no matter that there's no proof that the Syrian government was involved in engaging with using the chemical weapons, and all the evidence is that, in fact, the insurgents, led by Saudi Arabia and funded by the Saudis, have been pressing and using the chemical weapons. However, this Security Council resolution does call on all parties to the Syrian conflict to put away, disown chemical weapons. That includes the insurgents. Now, it is, of course, a paradox that the West, that is France and William Hague here in England, still believes they should, and it's ethically right, to support the insurgents in Syria. So no doubt the British government is now supplying the Al-Nusra Front and the Islamic Front for the Salvation of Syria and Iraq, or whatever it's called. No doubt the British government is now supplying those terrorist organisations with machetes so they can behead Christian missionaries or pastors or Alawite community leaders in Syria. I mean, it's absolutely ridiculous and disgusting. I think this type of policy whereby one weapon is banned but everything else is allowed is ridiculous. And Ban Ki-moon, the UN Secretary General, actually said that he didn't want this agreement over chemical weapons to mean that a green light is given to other weapons in the Syrian conflict. What is needed is a complete disarmament of all sides, but in order for this to take place, Kerry and the neoconservatives in Washington and the neoconservatives in London and William Hague in particular and people like Frederick Christian Hoff, who is actually the man who started this latest round of conflict in the Middle East, who's a neoconservative in Washington. This peaceable situation will only happen if these parties to the conflict, the Western belligerents, the Western war criminals, actually disown their clients.
Indeed.
As it is. Yeah.
Thank you very much for that. We appreciate it. Wish we had more time. William Spring there talking to us from London. He's a human rights activist.